Welcome everyone. Glad to see you on my channel. Today I will tell you about an unusual story, an amazing story about companionship and love. I wish you a pleasant audience.
Angelica realized that something was wrong as soon as she crossed the threshold. In general, at first glance, it might seem that everything in the house as usual fresh bouquet of gladiolus, which she cut from the flower bed in the morning, stands in a vase in the hallway. Her husband had said that flowers at home were useless dust collectors, but Angelica was adamant that she had defended her favorite thing. After all, she had sacrificed so much for Sam. From the kitchen came the tantalizing smell of soup she guessed with brisket. Aubrey, like a good housekeeper, had quickly become accustomed to cooking from her host's favorite recipes. The living room, which was visible from the hallway, was clean, tidy, everything neat, and yet it just hit her in the brain. The realization that something was wrong. And then Angelica realized what it was. She noticed a foreign, wrong element, which was a woman's shoe. First of all, she never threw her shoes around. Secondly, she hated brown-colored shoes, and those shoes with the thick, gaudy heels couldn't belong to her at all. Some bad thoughts lazily rumbled in her mind, like carelessly disturbed predators, which just give the will to eat in a moment. And then Angelica's ears heard the sounds of sighs, some fiddling. They came from behind the bedroom door. Angelica froze, holding the doorknob. It wasn't too late to turn around and tell herself that she shouldn't be so suspicious. After all, it is indeed. Such bad thoughts are as impossible as, say, a grown man's fear of the dark. But her brain had already put 2 plus 2 to shoe, which could belong to one person known to Angelica, and the sounds of fiddling. Added it up, and as if the red lights were now flashing more. We need to find out the answer sooner, right now, sooner. It's the million-dollar question. Holding her breath, as if the lack of oxygen could somehow prepare her for the discovery of the truth, Angelica pushed open the door and saw the bedroom and everything that was going on in it. And there was a lot to see. Sam was ardently making love to the housekeeper right on the marital bed. The appearance of an uninvited spectator, of course, distracted these two. Angelica howled the husband, rolling off the bed onto the floor. He hastily wrapped himself in the covers. Angelica smiled broadly, because first, she was ready to burst into hysterics, when tears mixed with laughter in a crazy cocktail, created by nature, must be for the protection of the psyche, and secondly, because in this form Sam reminded a little of an ancient Roman in a toga. Angelica, it's... Sam looked at his wife, then at Aubrey, who had a blanket over her head. Isn't that what I thought it was? Angelica asked, laughing. In the meantime, her soul was torn apart with horror. How could it be possible? Yes, brought homemade cottage cheese, butter, sour cream and cream. This time there was milk. The hand with the can was raised. Angelica opened its lid. She acted as if on automatic, stepped closer and poured the milk on the head of her husband. He froze and then scolded, "Are you crazy?" "No, now everything is clearer," said Angelica, and heartily launched the can into the woman, who was still under the blanket lurking. She shrieked, "They're killing her." "Calm down," said Angelica. "A bruise at most on your face will be." And then she just walked out of the bedroom, into the hall, then into the corridor and out into the street. Where did she go? I couldn't answer myself. Just, as they say, wherever she looked. Her eyes looked directly under her feet, and so Angelica walked and walked. The road twisted under her feet with a dusty ribbon. In the bushes that grew on one plot of land, from which the old owners had long since moved out, birds were singing. Angelica turned around. Her own house in the distance looked smart, like a postcard. The woman sniffed her nose and wiped it trivially with her sleeve, a sloppiness that the squeamish Angelica would never have allowed herself in the recent past. Only now everything of which her life consisted, of which it seemed that she herself consisted, was as if shaken, crushed, and mixed. Get 1,000,001 shards, reassemble if you can, ha ha. Her feet led to a stot under a blue roof. Angelica sat down on the metal bench, with her fingers digging into its edges, hunched over. How long she sat like that she lost track of time. Bosses were sliding, passing by. It seems that people were already paying attention to her. Someone asked if she was all right. She didn't answer. Someone suggested that maybe she'd had something to drink. She sobbed, got up, and staggered away. I wish I could use some kind of potion to take the pain out of her heart, to uproot her love for Sam like a weed, to breathe freely instead of forcibly, replaying images of betrayal in her mind's eye. Angelica turned around again. The house was no longer visible, disappeared behind the corner of the street. But she had dreamed all her life to live in a house like this, to have everything. For this reason, by the way, she had sold her apartment. With the proceeds, Sam had finished the house, and it turned out to be so nice, almost a mansion. More than 10 years of marriage, complete trust, and what did she get in return? Betrayal. Killed love. And for what? Did she do something wrong? And even if she had, was she so guilty before her husband that she deserved such a thing? It seemed to Angelica that the traffic light had turned green and she stepped on the road, except that there was a red light on, and now a car was coming straight at her. There was a squeal of brakes. The driver, taking advantage of the fact that the road was free, laid a steep turn, and even smoke from under the wheels went. The bumper stopped in the palm of her hand from Angelica's knees, and she finally blinked confusedly, raised her eyes to the traffic light and frowned. And why is it red? In general, the woman's realization was somewhere on the dangerous borderline of shock or a step to madness. Not that Angelica believed in the possibility of going crazy after a life tragedy, that is, cheating on her husband. But it seems that now she was ready to test the folk tale about how quickly you can catch schizophrenia on their own skin. Are you crazy? The driver who flew out of the salon hovered over the days of a pile of muscles and grabbed her by the shoulders, dragged her to the curb. You crazy fool. He shouted, but after a moment changed his tone. Angelica. The sun was behind his back. Her face was blurred, but she suddenly realized who Tony's former student was in front of her, or did she? Tony was remembered as a subtle kid with glasses who had been led to university by his mother and grandmother, and he did everything with brutal diligence to get expelled in the first session. His hilarious answers in history classes, which she led Angelica, the whole audience laughed. She and Tony had never known each other closely, and she didn't know what had happened to him after the expulsion. But there was no doubt that he was the one in front of her now. Except that the leanness had been replaced by muscularity. You don't want to look, but you'll notice, since the young man besides jeans is wearing a black t-shirt, exposing a tattooed torso almost like on the beach. Back then, he had funny bangs and crooked teeth, with a gap in the middle, for which, together with a slight stutter and a habit of slouching, he was nicknamed Zaka. Now he cut his hair short, almost bald. His teeth were nice and white. In his voice there was steel, and the whole Tony just radiated masculine aggressiveness and strength. Angelica noticed the striking changes in her worst student and wondered why she had to pay attention to all this. But she did, and her heart strangely twitched when he suddenly let go of her, almost in fright recoiled. Angelica, I'm sorry, please. Are you all right? This "you're all right" was said so kindly, so sincerely, that Angelica realized in an instant how not all right she was. And if before, while she was wielding a milk can and walking wherever she was going, she was still holding on, but now she snapped. She sobbed deeply, inconsolably, so that she was short of air, so that if an asteroid fell a step away from her now, she wouldn't even notice it. Angelica just collapsed into her grief, into the blackness of pain from betrayal, into the helplessness of loneliness. She heard fragments of phrases. The former student called her by name, asked about the reason for her tears, then led her somewhere, put her in the car, and there, by the way, it was much more comfortable to sob. You could curl up in a ball, like a squirrel in winter hibernation, put your nose in your knees, and howl as much as your soul desires. And it seemed to her to grieve forever. The car started, then slowed down. "Angelica, let's go." She yielded to the hands that guided her obediently, as if she were a puppet. At the edge of her consciousness was a broken Yule log of understanding of what was going on. He led her to the cafe, U Lubovia, the nearest catering establishment from their street on the outskirts, not counting the shawarma stand. He brought her there and sat her down at a table. The waitress came over and asked her what was wrong. "Husband cheated," Angelica howled. "I'm not a husband," Tony said hastily. "I'm an acquaintance. You bring us some black coffee and some cakes." "Angelica, I understand. I don't understand. But you're going to be sick now. You have low blood pressure. Let's not go to the hospital. Have some coffee and we'll talk, okay?" Angelica nodded and was surprised that he remembered such a small thing as her health. It's just that once she became ill at the university and fainted. The ambulance came. She explained to them that her blood pressure was chronically low, and that, apparently, from overwork, it happened so. The waitress came back and quickly placed the order and handed Sam a pack of tissues. "How awful," quietly expressed sympathy. "You call if you need anything." "Thank you," Tony replied. "Angelica, here you go," he said, holding out the handkerchiefs. She sobbed and took a greedy gulp of air. Even if you want to cry more than anything else in the world, at some point the body protests and demands a break solely, so to speak, for self-preservation. And as strange as it was, Tony was like an anchor with which Angelica suddenly had a grip on the real world. She used the handkerchief carefully, then awed, thinking that they were actually in a cafe and there were other people here. "I'll be quick," she muttered and ran to the bathroom, where she cleaned her nose normally and washed her face with cold water. She came back, staggered and sat down at the table. I took a sip of black coffee and took a bite of half an eclair. It was sweet, bitter, but I felt better immediately. "Thank you." "It's nothing," Tony said. "Here we are, holding on, living." So he was patiently drinking his coffee while his former teacher was getting her strength back. "Sorry," said Angelica as her ability to speak returned to her, not just roaring. "Oh, what a meeting." "Yeah," Tony grinned. "You haven't changed at all." Angelica looked at him skeptically. She imagined how good she was with her makeup and red nose. Tony seemed embarrassed and averted his eyes. "So you got married?" "A year after you were expelled. The same day, by the way," she shrugged. "I don't know why that number sticks in my memory. I wasn't married, but I'm sorry for your loss." "That's what they say, Tony, when someone dies," Angelica grinned bitterly. "Although, today we're all dead." "I'm a dummy," I blurt things out. The young man bowed his head. "I'm sorry." "You're welcome, really. And thank you for all this. What else could it be? You know, you were in a terrible state on the road. How long have you been out?" "Since this morning." And Angelica told me everything that happened this morning. "You just told me when you get tired of listening to an old fool." "How old you are?" "You're only that." He thought for a minute. 39. No more. 42. "You're talking." I'm listening." "Thank you. I think." And Angelica started talking about how she's just torn up about what happened. And it didn't seem like anything was going to go wrong. She thought everything was fine. She had met Sam at the height of her young teaching career at the university, where she was the youngest historian. She loved her own subject immensely, though she would have loved even more to devote herself to the specific subject of the ancient Roman era rather than history in general. But getting a grant and a place to work in Italy didn't work out, and dreams had to be put aside in favor of practical steps to build a career. And then, life began to literally poke her nose in difficult circumstances, as if hinting that not everything, my dear, will be with you as you want. Angelica's closest people got sick at the same time. Her only family, her grandmother had a stroke. Her mother was hospitalized with a heart attack. From work had to go on emergency leave at their own expense to take care of relatives. Then, when coped with illnesses a little bit, the rector put before a curious fact. It turns out that in Angelica's place, he had already found a person, and from his relatives, that is, by acquaintance. The rector thought that this person would be better, because he knows how to obey his, the rector's, advice about which of the students to meet and give better grades. Angelica was cathartically against any kind of indulgence. She thought about it. You have a second profession, my dear, the rector told her. You're an accountant, aren't you? You'd better leave science and teaching to other people, especially since you can't devote yourself to serious business. You have a family too. Angelique answered him. And what would you do in my place? But I'm not, so. No, you can come back, of course. But, you see, think about it. You'll ruin your reputation. And with what? Angelica asked confusedly, who did not leave the feeling that they were ready to play an unfair game against her. True, she did not quite understand why. Or was it for what? After all, she only came to this university to teach, had the nerve to refuse the rector in the affair, and even complain to his wife. Did he really wait for the time and reason to take revenge? Angelica understood that in principle, she could stay teaching at her favorite place, and no fooling with the bosses would not interfere. But already later, looking back, she realized what guided her. Making a fateful decision, too many problems piled up, and work in a toxic atmosphere seemed the last straw. Angelica quit her job. She thought that in principle, she would find a new good place without any problems later, and everything was decided by chance. A good friend of the family was just retiring from a firm that provided accounting services to small businesses, and she, having learned about the situation in Angelica's life, made her a favorable offer to take this place. The salary was excellent, the schedule was flexible, and the place of work was not far from home. The decision was made, and Angelica changed her profession. At first, it was strange and scary even, but she got used to it after a couple of months. Then a businessman came to the firm for services, and it was Sam. He wanted to settle things before he closed his business. Sam was very talkative, and soon everyone knew that he could have become a millionaire, but his best friend betrayed him in business, and now he was losing everything, thanks to the fact that he didn't have millions of dollars in debts. And it just so happened that Sam was attracted to Angelica. However, she first time kept aloof for love adventures, when sick mom and grandmother in his arms. But again in her life, everything turned upside down. First, her grandmother died of a second stroke. Sam was there to help with the funeral, consoled. And then suddenly Angelica's father showed up, with whom her mom divorced 20 years ago, and asked back. And her mom agreed. Daughter, life is almost lived, she frankly shared with Angelica. He was my first love. Yes, he was wrong. It did not work out there at him. But now at least old age together will meet. Angelique was sick of living with a traitor under the same roof. That's why she accepted Sam's marriage proposal. At the family council, they decided to sell the apartment of Angelica's family and give her the money at the cost of the share she owned in it. Her father and mother used the rest of the money to buy a 2-bedroom. Angelica invested everything in the house of her husband. Sam lived in another city, and she easily agreed to move because in his native nothing held. And then, somehow decided that teaching is also a part of the past. And her husband insisted that the accountant, it is a bigger salary, it is solid, and not some nonsense about history, which today no one needs. And family life began. Angelica believed she found her safe harbor. Now she will have everything, with what the family was late, children. But children were not born. After several years of examinations, which went to Angelica, her husband admitted that he has a problem, but begged not to leave, asked tearfully in tears that whether her love is measured only by his ability to have children. Angelica was very hurt. After all, she dreamed of becoming a mom, but she agreed, and this is how their family ended up caught cheating with the housekeeper, which, by the way, for her own money hired in order to work extra to earn money for her husband for treatment. And what to do now? I don't know. And if I get divorced, where will I go? Sighed Angelica. What a fool I was. All the money I gave him, just like that. He already had money for a house, but you see, wanted more, he said, for our future children will be spacious. And he knew, such a bastard, that infertile. A waitress came to the table and took away the empty coffee cups and saucers from the cakes. Lunch? Tony approached Angelica. Thanks, but I don't have an appetite. And then, I've already held you up. I wasn't in a hurry today. The guy grinned. I'm free until tonight. Let's have lunch. Only the bill in half, said Angelica. My treat. But you left your husband. Tony looked carefully, just into the depths of the soul, twisted by treason. You could use the money now. Angelica shrugged her shoulders and thought, did she really leave her husband? After all, she has, right now, with money, for example, to rent an apartment, not very. And it worked, to not borrow from the girls, and so already borrowed, all owed. What did you borrow for? To pay off Sam's loan, which he took out for the car tuning. To go back to my hometown, back to my mom. No way. Angelica knew that there would be a mother on his own example, will beg to forgive the traitor and save the marriage. Angelica firmly, to the pain bit her lip situation, was the most critical. But she couldn't even think about going back to Sam. She could live on the street now. So, let's go back to my place, Tony said suddenly, as if he'd read her mind. Don't be so hot and don't say no. I'm not offering you anything dirty. I just don't have enough money to lend you a decent sum. But I'll give you a place to sleep. The apartment in the center, on the avenue, 2 rooms. Everything is normal. I rent it. But there won't be any problems with it. A man I know rents it, and who I bring there is not interested. That is, Tony's cheeks flushed, and it looked terribly funny and cute on such a brutal jock. I don't mean I'm always driving. I don't drive at all. That's what I said. I need to think. Angelica sighed. And then luckily, they were distracted from their thoughts because they were choosing what to order. Angelica picked at the chicken pasta with her fork. Moving in with her former student. Interesting. She was a grown-up, reasonable woman. And what did she expect? Going to the apartment of a man she hardly knew even then. Angelica thought that, perhaps, if she now polled 100 passers-by on whether it was a reasonable decision, they would all answer that it was madness, dangerous madness. Only Angelica was in such a state of mind. If a fire-breathing dragon came down from the sky and offered her something similar, she would gladly jump on his wing. All right, she replied. I just have to go and get my stuff. I'll come with you. Let's finish eating then and let's go. He paid for her. They left the cafe, got into his car. The way back took about 5 minutes. Angelica stopped on the doorstep. She didn't know what to say to Sam now. Perhaps the truth. But she didn't feel afraid. She knew that Tony would protect her in case of trouble. There was no comparison between her hubby's build and his. But it was Aubrey who opened the door. She was wearing a dress. Thank God she wasn't naked, Angelica thought. Oh, she rounded her eyes. Angelica. Shoo! The landlady growled at her and went inside. Sam's not here. The housekeeper mumbled and moved sideways. Who's that with you? Do you think you have the right to ask me anything? Angelica threw over her shoulder as she went into the bedroom. She felt physically nauseous as she crossed the threshold. But there was nothing to do here. In the closet were stored travel bags, her things, It took about 10 minutes to pack, changing the usual neatness. Angelica just threw everything in a pile, then barely zipped up. Tony was waiting for her in the next room in menacing silence, and there on the sofa, folded her hands in her lap and pressed her lips, sat Aubrey. "I'm done," Angelica said, but before leaving the house, she turned to Aubrey. "Don't be too happy that you took my husband away. He's a rotten man inside. You yourself already realized, probably, if not completely stupid." On the street, Angelica was called by a neighbor looking out of the fence. First, she asked what they had decided about the pruning of the apple tree that was climbing up to their plot, and then she asked where Angelica was going, and who is that next to her. "It's simple," answered Angelica, and feeling a dizzying dash, almost not sweetness feeling on the tongue, added, "Her husband cheated, and now I have the right, and with a lover leaving. And where? It's none of your business." Tony, hearing this, raised his eyebrows, but said nothing and sat down in the driver's seat after Angelica climbed into the cabin, directed the car on the road, away into the city. About the fact that she might be doing something wrong, Angelica thought only after stepping over the threshold of Tony's apartment. In general, this apartment from the threshold had the appearance of the most ordinary clean. From the corridor view, the kitchen, and a room with a sofa. No there, say, scattered bottles. But Angelica did not expect that her new old acquaintance suddenly began to undress. Tony pulled his t-shirt over his head. "I'm going to take a shower. It's hot today." He said, "You get settled. The refrigerator, by the way, use freely, but there is almost nothing they rarely eat at home. And in general, don't be shy." He winked and jingled his belt buckle and disappeared into the bathroom. Angelica went into the room. It looked like she was going to leave here, because in the next room there was a bed with scattered belongings of the owner. Apparently, he did not strive for perfect order. Sighing, Angelica began to unpack her bag. A new life had begun. And tomorrow, by the way, she still had to go to work. Angelica licked her lips. Indeed, the weather was so dry that her throat was as dry as the Sahara. She went into the kitchen. She got drunk, put the kettle on. In the refrigerator, she found sausage, cheese, butter, and a loaf in the cupboard. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed Tony's silhouette in a towel flashed in the corridor. He came back in 5 minutes in jeans and a fresh snow-white t-shirt. But no sooner had they had tea than the phone rang. It was Sam. "Angelica, what are you doing there?" Outraged husband. "What are you doing?" Angelica rolled her eyes. "It's over between us." What kind of a man was with you? If Sam could breathe fire, the flames would have remotely sizzled, Angelica thought, and grinned vindictively, because her husband did not have that ability and therefore was completely powerless. "Oh, sorry, I forgot to ask you." "Darling, well, forgive the fool." "Yes, I made a mistake, but I'm a man, it happens." "What? That's your excuse. You know what?" "Angelica, where did you go, huh?" "Dictate the address, I'll pick it up. We're family. We need to have a serious talk." Suddenly, the phone was snatched out of Tony's hands. Tony was clearly sick of listening to this. "You're not getting it back." "Who's that?" "Her boyfriend." "Yeah, that's the one." "What, are you threatening me?" "You know, if she hadn't asked to keep your pathetic." Tony rose from the table and gestured for Angelica to wait, and she was in a panic and reached to take the phone away. He didn't let her and kept talking. In flowery, juicy words, he told her where Sam could go with all his claims and added that the divorce would definitely take place, as well as the division of property according to all rules and justice, and then, so to speak, he could go on walking on his Dumby women. Oh. Angelica grabbed her head with both hands. "What have you done?" "You know," answered Tony coldly, and with the most unperturbed look. "Well, I realized that you are serious and just helped. You would have told him a lot of things yourself, right?" After a nod, he continued. Believe me, your ex is one of those who are ready to grind their nerves for a long time. So I decided to show that you are not lonely. Now he will not dare to come to you at work, and maybe in the divorce will not fight. What, didn't I do the right thing? Right, sighed Angelica. Thank you. By the way, what are you doing tonight? Why? No reason. I'm going somewhere interesting, and I'm thinking of taking you with me. I think. He sat at the table again and looked her in the eye. You bring me luck, and I need it badly. What are you talking about? Angelica was confused. Bringing luck? Now you'll understand what I'm talking about, said Tony, and returned to the time when he, including thanks to the fierce efforts of Angelica, was expelled from the university. Tony was born into a very ordinary family. His mother was a district doctor, his father worked at the factory, his grandmother worked all her life in the library, and his grandfather lived with her in the village and was a combine harvester. But with his grandfather and grandmother on the father's side, everything was not so simple. Dimka saw them rarely, when only they agreed to accept their relatives as guests. This couple lived separately in a beautiful wooden house in the country, which was like a gingerbread hut, and inside was exactly a museum. Grandmother and grandfather devoted their whole life to science, or rather history and art. They wrote a number of books, recognized by the strict scientific community, traveled all over the world, and it so happened that his father decided that Tony needed to continue the noble family tradition and become a historian, perhaps an art historian. But Tony was categorically against. In general, the ability to do all this he had, but in the life of the guy beckoned adventure. He wanted to see the world, to do something that brings adrenaline and big money. That's why he went to the extreme step, achieved expulsion with shame after not having the guts to openly oppose the will of his parents. And then, to prove he'd grown up, he left home. Motivatia everywhere in the world good, found friends, ready to shelter for the first time. What only did not do during this time worked as a diving instructor, participated in a rally in the desert, was an animator in the castle allegedly haunted in France, and even engaged in the sale of antiques. And the latter business was particularly familiar to Tony, because to do it still grandfather willed to give everything to his grandson, and just what cover letter supplemented the grandparents of their wills, and became one of the reasons why Tony quarreled with the rest of his family. The thing was that his grandfather asked his rich collection of antiques to pass to museums, and some of the punishment to sell and donate the funds. For example, a private foundation which helped forest animals nursing, and also to the riding school and the theatre private children's. Something, however, grandfather decided to give Tony himself for a good, so to speak, a start in life. That's why the boy went abroad. Mom, dad, grandparents, and other relatives, they were all shocked. After all, theoretically, Tony could have inherited all the property, money from him, to himself, for his family, and not spend it like that. But the guy did what he did, and everything. Since then, they never wanted to see him in his native house. Angelica, having heard all this, expressed sympathy. She was not quite agree with Tony's choice, but could not understand how it refused him. But he had essentially just disposed of what was his, and now Tony was back, not to his hometown, but just to his hometown too, to rest a bit and think about his life. But why did you think that I bring luck? Angelica asked. Just then, while I was studying, I looked at you and thought, here is a man who is in his place. I thought, this amazing woman is doing something she loves, so why not take an example from her? You gave me courage, and I was lucky enough to change my life. I can't say that everything was great afterwards, but I'm convinced that if I hadn't met you, I might not have been so bold. Tony, noticing how Angelica was yawning, suggested that we go to our rooms and have a rest, so to speak, with a fresh head. Angelica agreed. She didn't care where Tony decided to take her tonight, but she assumed it would be a club. What did it matter where? Just to forget about all this nightmare in her personal life. Waking up in the evening and showering, changing into a house dress because she couldn't afford to walk around the apartment in a robe, Angelica looked in her bag. It was funny, but she and Sam had been living in such a way for the last few years that she didn't have to think about dressing up at all. Except for the 3 days of the year, New Year's Eve, his birthday, and her birthday. However, on her last birthday, they had a fight, and she spent it crying into her pillow. Angelica grinned. She was crazy. She had settled down with a man she hardly knew, even temporarily. By the way, she had to explain her situation at work, and maybe someone else would borrow a little. Suddenly, at the bottom of the bag, Angelica noticed a bright-colored spot. She pulled the thing on herself. She had bought it 100 years ago at some sale, and then she had never worn it. So maybe, was it time? "Wow," Tony said when he came out of his room. "You look amazing." "Thank you." Angelica smiled embarrassedly and fixed a strand of hair. She was wearing a tight-fitting scarlet sleeveless mini dress. Her own body in it, when she looked at herself in the mirror in the hallway, seemed alien from where the lushness in the chest, such rounded hips and long neckline. But in principle, everything was clear, just Angelica was used to wearing any kind of frank clothes. "Do you think it's too much?" she asked. "No." Tony grinned. "You're a beauty, but it's getting cold outside." Now there was a cardigan somewhere. She went to get it, but he stopped her. "Don't give me this." With these words, Tony threw off his black jacket and threw it over Angelica's shoulders. She shuddered at the touch of his skin, soaked with the warmth of his body and his perfume, and a strange shiver went down her spine. She smiled at him. She was ready for any evening. The car slowed down, leaving not far from the center of the city, but this street could not be called a place that would be known to the general public. Half of the streetlights did not work here, and the walls were covered with graffiti. "What's here?" Angelica asked. She got out of the car, accepting a gallantly offered hand. "One special place," Tony answered, and leading her to a wall covered with painted iron, he kicked it several times with his shoe. The wall suddenly turned out to be a door. First there was a rustling sound, then a narrow flap moved aside, and someone looked out from the other side. And then, apparently recognizing Tony, opened it. Angelica said nothing, but stepped into the narrow, red-purple lit corridor with admiring wariness. The big man gave her an indifferent look. Everything that was happening definitely promised some kind of adventure. And then Angelica was almost blinded by the flickering lights and deafened by the thundering music. They found themselves in a hall full of people. The place was on the edge of fun, and she would have been lost in it the first minute if Tony's confident hand hadn't been on her waist, pulling her patronizingly close to him. "What are we doing here?" Angelica asked, trying to shout over the chaos created by the DJ speakers. "They are waiting for me," answered Tony. "I am the guest of honor, and you are my mascot." She didn't have time to clarify what he was talking about, because they went through another door. Angelica rounded her eyes. In front of her was an arena, reminiscent of a boxing ring, but surrounded by a metal net. Tony looked into her eyes. "Wish me luck." "Good luck." Angelica exhaled confused and stayed on this side in the front rows of spectators. Tony walked around the strange ring, did something in the corner, and after a few minutes returned to it, stepped into the cage. He was naked from the waist down, leather gloves with the fingers cut off. "All hail our champion, Black Tiger," exclaimed the announcer, a funny little man with a scarlet mohawk, and the crowd roared and applauded for our special guest, The Rock. The crowd roared like crazy again, and Angelica opened her mouth and rounded her eyes in horror, because in the ring came a real big man, 2 heads taller than the tall Tony, broad in the shoulders. He seemed to be able to crush the opponent with his shadow alone. The crowd was clearly excited. It smelled of strong drinks, something sweet. No, Angelica realized she didn't like it here at all. It was just disgusting. But she, unfortunately, had no influence on what was happening. She only had to watch. And after a few minutes, she too was squealing with excitement because Tony was winning. On the side of the Rock was brute strength and mass, on the side of Black Tiger speed and agility. Angelica was pushed in the shoulder, but she almost did not pay attention to this person next to her was a man in a strict business suit, inappropriate for this atmosphere. He gave her a scrutinizing glance, then fixed his eyes on the ring. Tony was one punch away from winning, but here he once again cast a glance at Angelica, winked at her cheerfully, dashingly, and then suddenly changed in his face, as if he had seen something terrible. Angelica realized he was distracted, and that's when Scala hit him with all his might and then in the face. Angelica squealed. Her squeal was picked up by someone else in the audience, Tony. She watched in shock as the fight announcer calmly waited to see if Tony would get up, then calmly counted down and declared The Rock the winner. Angelica struggled to make her way through the mass of people. She was afraid to lose sight of Tony, who was being carried out of the ring. He was placed on a worn leather couch in the corner. Tony! Tony! Angelica bent over the boy. Her fingers stained scarlet. Somebody call an ambulance. She looked around helplessly. They won't call anyone right here. The guy in the suit who appeared next to her coldly informed her, "This is illegal fighting." "What are you new? Do something," she exclaimed and was about to call an ambulance herself. But the man in the suit intercepted her hand, reaching for her purse. He seemed to be paying attention to her. "I'll help. Tony's a friend of mine." "Oh, thank you." Angelica rushed around as the suit-clad man helped a barely conscious Tony up. Scarlet dripped from the guy's nose onto the floor. He tried to say something, but it didn't come out well. "Tony, it's okay. Your friend's here. It's gonna be okay. We're going to the hospital now." She was gibbering as we walked towards the exit of the club. Outside, the man with Tony floundering weakly headed toward an impressive black SUV with two other men standing beside it. Angelica had the thought that they looked the most thuggish. Tony was half sitting in the back seat. One of the gangster types got into the driver's seat. The other walked to the next car, another SUV. The type in the suit sat in the front passenger seat and Angelica sat next to Tony. The doors slammed shut and the cars drove off. "Tony, are you okay?" Angelica asked, noticing that he was starting to come to his senses. "What? Where are we going?" He frowned, touching his jaw and the back of his head alternately. "It's okay." Angelica did so, unconsciously touching her palm to his cheek. "Just because. It felt like it. Luckily a friend was nearby, and he's taking you to the hospital right now." "What friend?" "An old friend," the man said and turned around with a chuckle. "A friend you had the misfortune to forget." In front of Angelica's eyes, Tony turned white. "Alex, I can explain everything." "I'm sure you can. What's your excuse for screwing me out of $12 million? What's going on?" Angelica asked, shocked. A frightening hunch pierced her like lightning. This guy in the suit is not a friend, but Tony knows him, and it seems that we're talking right now about some very bad, maybe even criminal case. "Excuse me," Angelica squeaked. "How much does he owe you?" 12. "You've always had a taste for girls," Alex grinned. "But why marry a fool?" "Dollars, darling. American dollars." Angelica was shocked not by the astronomical sum, but by the fact that she was mistaken for Tony's wife. "But we're not married." It was clear from Alex's tone that he didn't believe it. "And you're just wearing the ring for jewelry." "You know, when I was searching all those places where he might be, I didn't count on this kind of luck. But then I saw you in his jacket. I thought, what luck." "Tony, you know, he doesn't give his things, especially things he believes bring good luck, to anyone. And here he's dressed you up in his favorite jacket. I thought you must mean a lot to him." And then I noticed the ring and thought I'd hit the jackpot. Turns out our bad boy not only decided to quit after dumping some very serious people, but he's gonna settle down, get a wife, have kids, all that. Tony laughed, cringed at the sensation in his ribs, wiped his eyes with mingled tears of pain and amusement. You idiot, I'm not married. He fumbled, pulling his glove off his hand and waving it around, spreading his fingers. I have no ring. And she, there's nothing between us. She has nothing to do with it. His voice sounded deadly serious now, and Angelica thought that any man who had not lost his instinct for self-preservation, hearing such a voice, should immediately do what he said, let her go. This is our business, and we'll settle it ourselves. You know, I don't believe you, Alex said, maybe because you've deceived me before. Your girlfriend will keep us company, and then, maybe she'll leave. It's up to you. Look, I don't know what you've been fighting about. Angelica licked her lips nervously, and whether the heater in the cabin was on full blast, or from nerves, but she suddenly became very hot. She threw off her jacket. But you're committing a crime by holding us. You can't. Do you want to know what your adored Tony did? Alex asked dryly and pointedly and spoke. It turned out that Tony abroad was not only engaged in what he told Angelica about, he was also involved in the illegal trade in antiques. And one day, he was entrusted with the transportation of priceless vases from Southeast Asia. But when the goods arrived at an auction in one of the cities of the Middle East, it turned out that each of a dozen vases fake. Tony assured that he had nothing to do with it, that he was picking up the original goods, and he was framed by the middleman to whom he had entrusted its storage for a while. Except that the people who were looking forward to the ancient pottery were very disappointed and angry. But how did you even entrust him with this job? Wondered Angelica. He doesn't have the right higher education. My grandfather was obsessed with ceramics of the 13th century and just Southeast Asia. Tony grimly clarified, in this business, sometimes a diploma is not necessary. Although knowledge, of course, is important. He said a little silent, and the education of art historian I still received in Sicily. And why didn't you say anything? Angelica asked. No reason. Tony shrugged his shoulders. I don't like to remember that period of my life. Look, Angelica turned now to Alex. Surely there is something that can be done. Maybe. Well, I don't know. But there must be a way out. There is a way out. Alex turned to his captives and gave the young woman a concerned look. Those who are behind me want this idiot's head. But you can survive. Your, shall we say, presence will just make it easier. Faster for me to beat the answers to the right questions out of him. Angelica sighed convulsively at the nightmare she had gotten herself into. Alex had her purse with her phone, by the way, so there was nothing to think about calling for help. She looked desperately out the window at the nighttime cityscape. She was in trouble, and no one knew about it. No one could help her. The car stopped at a stoplight. Angelica's hand gingerly reached for the door. What if it works? They are blocked, said the silent driver. I do not advise you to resist. You'll only make things worse. Listen, you're making a big mistake. I have a husband. Colleagues and friends will be looking for me. I'm afraid it's you. Pretty girl, Alex said. When you got involved with that idiot. What do you see in him anyway? We met by chance. He helped me when I left home. My husband cheated. Angelica didn't know why she was saying all this. She was just going through the motions. Tony took me in. I've hardly even met him. I haven't seen him in over 10 years. He's my former student. I taught history. That's it, Alex said, and Angelica thought there was a tinge of interest in his tone. She continued talking about how Tony was kicked out of the university, about what she herself was doing in her career. Stop. Alex raised his hand. And from this point, more details. Do you consider yourself a brilliant expert on the art of Nero's era? Well, I would not say that brilliant, sighed Angelica. But, yes, my work has even been published abroad in Britain, Italy, and Germany. Angelica, be quiet, turned to her Tony, who was still not feeling well. Don't you dare get involved in all this. And you know, Angelica, just if you agree to get involved in all this, you can change the situation, said Alex. You see, very soon there should be an auction with one unique lot. But unfortunately, we have suspicions that the jewelry was made in the early Middle Ages, that they are just a skillful stylization. But if we could confirm their authenticity, these things could take part in this auction. There are buyers for them, by the way. And then, I must say, the profit could cover what Tony owes us. You're telling me you don't have someone with the right qualifications? I can't believe that the bandits who could do such a thing couldn't find someone. Angelica grinned. You see, Alex answered calmly. Right now, we are in a position where we don't need, let's say, to shine. And the specialists, who can provide the necessary services, rejected the offers of cooperation. There are reasons for that. We could deal with these lots later, but time is money. And if you, Angelica, will come to our aid, perhaps I can arrange it so that Tony's debt is forgiven. Angelica, no, don't you dare, She took Tony's hand, squeezed it lightly but firmly. I'm with you, and I'll help you. Then she turned to Alex. I'll do it. And I even have a passport. My husband and I were going on vacation. Where to? Alex asked. To Turkey. Unfortunately, the trip there will have to wait for you, Alex grinned. We'll go to an island in the Caribbean Sea. Where do you want me to go, boss? The driver asked. I told you not to call me boss, Alex grumbled. It smacks of a cheap action movie. To the airport. Right now, Angelica squeaked. No, she didn't doubt that she wanted, could and should help Tony. It was just, things were moving too fast. I think I forgot to turn off the iron at home, she said and sniffed, thinking that her life would never be the same again, if she could ever get out of this story alive. And after all, it seemed that her life was destroyed by her husband's betrayal. And it turns out that it was only the beginning. While the cars were rushing to the airport, in Angelica's mind, there were dozens of rescue plans, maybe right there to shout that they were kidnapped. But what if Alex assumed that they might try to escape, and he had an insidious and cruel plan ready? What if he arranges it so that they're immediately declared insane? Or even killed? Angelica was pondering and didn't notice when they arrived. She got out of the car. Tony too, luckily now on his own. And when is our flight? She asked cautiously. Right now, Alex grinned. In general, it was to be expected from the type who was involved in the criminal business for tens of millions of dollars, something like that. But Angelica still rounded her eyes when she realized that they were flying on a private plane. Lay the furniture in the cabin, smiling stewardess with drinks and snacks, which Angelica, however, refused. What kind of visa are we on? You ask too many questions for your position. Alex raised an eyebrow mockingly. Don't worry. You and him. He pointed a finger with a massive gold ring at his captives in turn. Like tourists. I have my own people in customs, so there won't be any problems. Just keep your mouth shut. Aha, Angelica said thoughtfully. You speak English very well. My mother was a model and a beauty queen, answered Alex. But it's not interesting to talk about me, believe me. Let's talk about you. And how did such a charming lady get involved with such an idiot? He's got bad boy written all over him. Or are you one of those who like love with a taste of danger? Alex suddenly moved forward and his free hand was suddenly right on Angelica's naked knee. Goosebumps pierced her body again, only now not the strange thrill of anticipation, but animal disgust. I'm the kind of man who prefers to think about business at work, Angelica said coldly, so keep your hands off me. And tell me more about this jewelry. I like it. Nodding, Alex pulled away and leaned back in his chair. I think we'll work together." The flight seemed endless at first. They made 2 landings in Europe. But when the plane went to land at their destination, Angelica thought it was over too fast. And while they were going through customs, she dreamed that it would be great if the police or some other service would swoop in. If that swag Alex would be put face down on the floor. And she and Tony, having realized that they were just victims of circumstances, would be allowed to go home. But that didn't happen. Leaving the airport, they got into cars again, and now the guards in the escort were more numerous and did not hide the fact that they carried weapons. Angelica was surprised to note that they had arrived not in some secret and gloomy place where she thought illegal auctions were to take place, but in the center of the city to a huge modern building. Alex pointed at it from afar, saying that this was where everything would take place, and then the cars turned to the luxurious hotel. By the way, an important nuance, Alex said to Angelica, "For everyone, you are legal invited experts. If anyone asks questions, just refer to the 5th clause of the contract, which you signed with the auction house, Phoenix." Alex blocked Angelica's path, gripped her chin imperiously, forcing her to look herself in the eye. "Remember, baby, one wrong word, one wrong breath, and death will seem to both of you the best desirable, but alas unattainable solution to all your problems. I will personally take care of it with my own hands." Angelica nodded and even smiled, just because there was nothing else to do right now. "In 4 hours, you will be taken to the rooms to familiarize yourself with the products. In the meantime, you should clean yourself up." Alex snorted dismissively. "You don't look like qualified specialists like that." He handed Angelica a card. "There are boutiques downstairs at the hotel where you are going now. Don't worry, I won't charge you. When you're ready, they'll pick you up. But hurry up, I don't like to wait." Angelique gave Alex a gloomy look. Even more gloomy were the 2 types of the most gangster-like appearance sitting on the sofas in the hotel lobby, naturally to see if the mice would escape from the mousetrap. "Why don't you say anything?" Angelica asked as she and Tony went up to their floor. "Because you're stupid," he snapped at her. "What?" Angelica put her hands to her sides. "You know, in this situation, you could at least thank me for the fact that you, figuratively speaking, are going to the scaffold, breaking your head." Tony looked frowning, but worried. "If you hadn't pretended to be educated and said that I didn't mean anything to you, Alex would have let you go." "And what would I have done then?" "I don't know," Tony shrugged. "You'd go back." "Back to where?" Angelica realized that now was not the best place and time for a lover's quarrel, but she couldn't help herself. "Let me remind you that I left my husband, who cheated, on our bed." "You could have gone back to your normal life," said Tony. "Now, stop." Angelica took a deep breath that made her lungs ache and exhaled. "Now we're going to act on the circumstances and get out of this mess together, okay? You know, she smiled when you went to my class. I thought you had something in you, a spark of talent. Only you're hiding it for some reason. So don't you dare disappoint me. I'm already seeing an awful lot of terrible men around me." "Okay," Tony was less pessimistic. "Let's try to really make it." The adjoining rooms that Alex had rented for them were truly royal. But Angelica did not admire the beauty of the surroundings right now. She wanted to take a shower. But there was one problem: no change of clothes. So she left Tony in his room and went downstairs. Angelica didn't like shopping in her normal life. Where would she get the mood now? And yet she sighed delightedly as she stepped into the bright, spacious boutique. She had never bought anything in a place like this before. The woman glanced at the price tag of the nearest item of some lingerie-style top. Wow! The price was indicated in dollars, and a simple calculation showed that the price was equal to her salary for 6 months. However, Angelica hummed, "What difference does it make? It's not her who's paying." So, she chose jeans, a couple of skirts, a dress, as well as shoes and sneakers, underwear, handbags. Fortunately, this boutique had enough of everything that allowed a modern woman to make a closet for a few days. And there was no doubt that they were stuck here. The next destination was a cosmetics store. And then, why not? Hummed Angelica and turned to the jewelry store. If even Alex gets mad, so what? He needs her alive and unharmed, because there is a brutally important auction coming up. I'm crazy, Angelica said aloud, estimating that with the money spent now in her hometown, she could buy an apartment in the center, and not just one. When she returned to the room, she found Tony lying on the bed, and he was wearing a terry cloth robe. "Hi," Angelica said, and threw a bag of clothes at him. She'd taken the liberty of grabbing pants, a shirt, a jacket, and a couple of t-shirts, and hoped she hadn't gotten the wrong size. "Why are you always showing off naked in front of me?" "Because I've long ago developed a cunning plan to get you away from your husband," Tony answered, catching the package on the fly. "I don't understand why you're holding on like this." "And what should I do?" She shrugged her shoulders, wringing her hands and crying. "I am, by the way, an exceptional and valuable specialist, so thanks to me, we have a chance to get out of this mess." And it didn't occur to you that Alex would just decide to get rid of unnecessary witnesses at the end of this story. Actually, it really hadn't occurred to Angelica, but she ignored the question. Before Tony could ask anything else, there was a knock on the door, and when Angelique opened it, one of the types assigned to look after them said it was time to go. Once inside the spacious room, where all sorts of antiques were laid out and arranged in glass cabinets and on tables, Angelique felt a strange thrill, a mental tingle, a thrill to the point of tears. And all this was related to the fact that for the first time in many years, she had come into contact with history again. It was as if the woman had seen herself from the outside and now did not understand how life changes, and her husband had managed to make her take a wrong turn and give up her own vocation. She could have gone back to teaching. She could have gone back to being a scientist. No, Angelica had nothing against the activity of an accountant as such, but it was not hers at all. A pretty red-haired girl, who introduced herself as Gabby, rushed to Angelica. It turned out that she is a historian who had to introduce the leading experts, that is Tony and Angelica, with those very priceless jewelry from the era of Nero, Roman emperor. And as soon as Angelica saw those places, she forgot about everything in the world, because in front of her were immaculately preserved gold jewelry bracelets, tiaras, crests, rings, and thin chains. "Wow," Tony chuckled. "Was this worn on an elephant?" "No," replied Angelica. "They were usually skillfully wrapped around the body. It was often done by dancers and girls of easy virtue." Wearing linen gloves and armed with the proper tools for the task, Angelica delved into the treasure. She distanced herself from the fact that she was now working at the behest of a man who was clearly related to the mafia or some similar criminal organization, and the fact that perhaps, and even certainly, these jewels had a place in a museum, not in a private collection. Right now, absolutely everything became unimportant except the nuances and the essence of the objects lying in front of her. Angelica carefully took them, one by one in her hands, studied them, returned them to their places, and took them again. And every time she touched them, she thought that this was the most delightful feeling in the world, touching history. "So what do you think?" Alex asked her, appearing in the sanctuary of science, history, and culture at the end of the day. "They are authentic." Angelica tried to keep a low profile and serious. "They are unique pieces. It is unlikely that one day something else similar will be found. Why not? The masters of this school lived and worked in an area that was destroyed by a volcanic eruption. Don't you know that Vesuvius was much further north? No, the sea came. It's sad. The sad thing is, it'll sit on a shelf in some rich man's collection and people won't see it. But it will be seen by someone who appreciates beauty and history. What's the point of giving beautiful things to those who can't appreciate them? Alex grinned. I'm afraid we'll never understand each other, snorted Angelica. Who knows? Perhaps, after this cooperation is over, I will be able to offer you something extremely profitable. When is the auction? Tomorrow. And today, I think you should rest. Angelica, Alex called her when she was about to leave. I got the report on the spending on my card. So, she stuck her chin out proudly. Keep it up, and I'll decide that this is the kind of wife I need. Alex chuckled and then left. What did he mean by that? Angelica grumbled, embarrassed and bemused. He's an idiot. Tony gritted his teeth. How about dinner? Tony asked when they got back to the hotel. Don't tell me it was the last one. Angelica snorted. Not even a thought, smiled the man, more of a romantic one. What? Why not? After all, he said slowly, step by step reducing the distance between them. Angelica thought that this is how predators, for example mighty tigers, sneak up on antelopes. Only it was not the least bit scary. After all, continued Tony, who knows what will happen to us tomorrow? I've been wanting to do this for a long time. When? When? Angelica asked in a hushed voice, and it seemed to her that she knew the answer herself. When I first saw you at the university, he grinned, so strict, smart. You were in a cherry suit and glasses. But I knew that was the cover. The real you was different. What am I like? Different. Bold. Passionate. He was so close that his face burned with his breath. It was fresh with a hint of mint. Angelica felt, understood and realized with every fiber of her being that she had something important to say, but she couldn't think of anything to say. I think there's an Italian restaurant nearby. She blurted out, I'm starving. Do you like pizza? Very much, Tony replied, although he was ready to say and wanted to say something else. But he also didn't want to push. The restaurant turned out to be charming minimum of luxury, more like the coziness of an old family place. A smiling mustachioed waiter recommended dishes and drinks, and yet it seemed strange to me, Angelica said, forkful of spaghetti, to find a specialist so abruptly and allow him to be involved in cases where a lot of money is involved. In these cases, sometimes everything is decided and happens in a crazy way, Tony replied grimly. This Alex didn't even ask to see my diploma. No doubt he has already learned everything about you during the flight. How? Marveled Angelica. Darknet, Tony almost spat out, the shadow side of the world internet. In general, it's easy for people like Alex to gather all the information about a person in 5 minutes. Everything you do for a living. He used it against you in some way. Angelica suddenly realized he was blackmailing you to get you involved in that vase thing. Part of it was that Tony was having a hard time with this conversation, but then I realized I had a chance to make a lot of money. And I was tempted. I beg your pardon, the waiter reappeared near their table with a couple of fruit cocktails, a business card of the restaurant, a gift from that table, he explained, putting glasses with juicy, bright contents, and pointed to the neighboring table, where sat a strange man, whose rich clothes gave him away a native of India, committed to the traditional style of men's clothing. Thank you, but, Angelica said uncertainly. We accept the gift. Tony stopped her confusion and invited this gentleman to our table. What are you doing? Asked Angelica as the waiter, with a respectful nod, went to deliver the message. This is a wonderbot, one of the biggest industrialists in India, and also a great connoisseur of ancient jewelry. Listen to my advice, never turn down an opportunity offered to you by fate. I don't understand you. Who knows? Maybe it can help us in some way. You know, Angelica fidgeted in her seat. I'm afraid it's a bad idea. Your English must be excellent, maybe even Hindi. You've lived abroad for a long time. And I know, but I mostly read scientific articles in English. I'm not very good at speaking. Don't worry. Tony took my hand reassuringly. I'll translate for you if you don't understand something. But you'd better speak freely, as well as you know how. Won't he take offense? At what? I'll just tell him that my lovely companion hasn't practiced her language for a long time. Apparently, Mr. Vat was very happy that his sign of attention was not ignored. He moved to the couple's table and, without listening to any objections, immediately ordered a lot of delicacies for himself and his new acquaintances. And then he spoke. It turned out that Mr. Vat had been told by a bird on his tail, who was in charge of confirming the authenticity of the jewels, he intended to buy at tomorrow's auction. And by the way, as the Hindu added, not without pride in outbidding any price. Amar also added, as if by the way, that he realized that everything going on at this auction was a confidential matter, and he certainly didn't want to disturb. But he just had to personally pay his respects to the people who work with the treasures that are so desirable to him. He also said that he admired the fact that Angelique was not only a talented art historian, but also such a beauty whose hands and mind seemed specially designed to work with the greatest treasures of this world. Amar could speak floridly but understandably, a little tediously, but it seemed one could listen to his speeches endlessly. Mr. Vachu also assured the couple that the jewelry he had his eyes on was sold legally, and he hoped that as a good buyer, he would not be hindered in taking it away. When Angelique heard this, she almost laughed at how silly the Indian rich man's informers were. Deceived him because the gold of the era of Nero absolutely, definitely got to the auction house Phoenix illegally. However, Angelica did not say any of this. Instead, together with Tony, they had dinner in the company of an Indian, talked about all sorts of trifles, and then said goodbye. It was well past midnight when Tony escorted Angelica to her room. But when she had already taken the handle of her door, he suddenly stopped her. It happened so suddenly that she didn't even have time to think properly about what was happening. And then the dizzying cocktail of feelings seemed to send a command to everything reasonable in her mind to shut down. And now Angelica was capable of only one thing. She responded to Tony's light embrace and became as pliable as clay in his arms. She suddenly allowed herself to realize how much it hurt to be betrayed by her husband, and as if wanting to repay him in the same coin, or rather in a thirst to experience how free and submissive to her own desires she was now. Angelica suddenly moved closer to Tony, and her fingers rested on a handle of his room door. And then, words became unnecessary. They simply felt each other, studied each other, and got to know each other more and more, until the knowledge turned into a sweet oblivion into which they both fell. The morning brought embarrassment. Angelica got out of bed and, leaving Tony sleeping, simply ran to her room. What had she done? Everything between them was fine, and she had to ruin it. Hello. In the middle of her self-deprecating monologue to herself, there was a knock on the door and Tony was there. You disappeared, and I didn't have anyone to serve breakfast in bed. That's unnecessary, she replied and stepped back, folding her arms across her chest and bowing her head, a pose that made it easy to tell she was avoiding him. Wait. Tony looked confused. Did I do something to offend you? No. Come on, I can see something's wrong with you. It's because, you got that right. It's because we made a mistake. Mistake? He asked again, frowning. Angelica? Don't. She raised her hands, thrust them forward in a shouting gesture, warning him to stay away. It was a stupid accident. This is all an accident to you. More a stupidity, she replied, pressing her lips together. I was wrong. We shouldn't have. But why? Just because I'm still married. And then, this whole situation, you're my savior. We're in danger. I'm like crazy. I don't understand you. You don't have to. Angelica's flaring up more than before. Just leave me alone. Okay, Tony nodded. It's probably for the best. But then, well, don't you get it yet? There is no we. You were to me, a boy who pissed me off in class. You still are. I just realized it now. We can't be anything like you imagined. We're completely different. Angelica, I don't understand why you're saying all this as if you want to hurt me. Tony squinted dangerously. But I wasn't imagining things when I picked you up back then, when I helped you. I just couldn't do anything else. And now I felt. But I don't feel anything, she said, and was struck by the icy indifference in her voice. Tony was silent for a while. Nothing at all? Well, all right, I understand, and I won't interfere anymore. There, by the way, Alex called. I have to be there in an hour. The auction is starting. When he left, Angelique was in the bathroom crying her eyes out. What an asshole she felt. But she couldn't let. She just couldn't afford to ruin Tony's life. He's a young man and still a good man no matter what his past was. He is, after all, many years younger than her. There can't be anything serious between them. She's no match for him at all, which means it's not worth having illusions. Hence, now the most important and the only meaningful thing is to concentrate on the upcoming case. And very soon, as Alex said, in the next couple of days, everything will be solved. The auction with the sale of ancient Roman jewelry was to be held today. And then, as Alex told Alex, the buyer, before leaving with the lot, will conduct his own independent examination with the involvement of his chosen specialists. And if everything is fine, they will confirm the jewelry is authentic. Angelica did not doubt it in the slightest. And that means bad version of events simply had no right to exist. The auction looked like Angelica imagined a huge hall and silently gliding among the guests' waiters. And the guests are mostly men in strict suits with charming companions. Angelica herself decided not to show off and dressed simply in dark blue jeans, black turtleneck, and low-heeled loafers. She came here not to shine, but to work, or rather to observe how much the lot with jewelry would sell for, especially since Alex insisted on her and Tony's presence. It was as if he feared they might run away. Not that Angelica didn't have such thoughts, but she still had hopes to settle this dangerous adventure peacefully. Then perhaps it will be possible to return to her former life. Oh, and the former life is not left thanks to her husband. Well, I guess we can start over. And as for Tony, Angelica already knew the answer to that question. They would separate. Each will go his own way. And it was not only that the former student was involved in criminal affairs, they just absolutely did not fit each other. Finally, began that for the sake of which all here gathered. The guests were seated on chairs, and the host, with due pathos and picturesque descriptions, began to tell about the lots. Before Angelica's eyes, for astronomical sums, went glass figurines of German masters of the Renaissance, books written by the Spanish Inquisition, equally priceless and shabby clothes of medieval court ladies from Japan, diamonds of a certain English duchess, and here, finally announced her lot. Gold jewelry from the era of Nero became a record-breaking lot and went for more than $30 million. Angelica was in shock. No, as a historian, she could understand that things this, in fact, priceless, but it was too much. Magnificent. Amar, who flew up to her, shared his impressions with Angelica. I owe you the pearl of my collection. Congratulations on your acquisition. Angelique smiled faintly, but right, it is unnecessary. She added, embarrassed, when Amar, catching her hand, began to torment her with kisses. I have only verified the authenticity of the exhibits and clarified that they really came out of the hand of the same master. A different scholar, not as skilled, might have begun to doubt, and then these treasures wouldn't have been sold today. Well, I was just doing my job. Angelica smiled again. I just have to make you an offer. You've won me over. Amar ranted again. Apparently, he didn't understand, or just didn't want to understand, that Angelique didn't need his company at all. All her thoughts were occupied with her own problems, how to find Alex, and talk to him about the fact that it was time to let them go. So, looking around the hall in search of the main villain of the whole adventure, where they had accidentally fallen into. Angelica listened to the Indian half-heartedly. And that must be why she jumped when she heard what he wanted from her. And Mr. Vat wanted her to go with him to India, as a lover and a person who would help him to sort out a large collection of jewelry inherited from his ancestors. No, I'm sorry, but no way. Angelique shook her head. Why? Amar looked like an offended puppy. Ah, your heart must already belong to this harsh Tony. No, Angelique swallowed hard. There is nothing between us. Then what's the reason? Amar wouldn't stop. Angelica was about to give him a lecture that sometimes a woman just does not want a relationship, and in general, that she most of all just wants to go home. But then the doors of the auction room opened and some people rushed in. They were representatives of the local authorities, the police, and even, it seems, even the local special forces. There was panic. People rushed around. Women were screaming. Angelica was also rushing around in confusion until she was suddenly caught in Tony's arms. What happened? He didn't answer, and in a couple of minutes everything became clear. It turned out that the local authorities became aware of the illegal auction, and they decided, so to speak, all this business to cover. And then Angelica just fell into a stupor because Tony suddenly clasped his hands, cuffed them, and took him away. Precious, how are you? Amar reappeared. Oh, how horrible. Of course, I knew there might be trouble here, but not like this. I'm going to lose my treasure. The millionaire from India almost roared like a child. What a fool I am. They say, Mr. Vat waved his hand at the uniformed men who had cordoned off the showcases with lots that had not yet been handed over to the buyers. That my treasures were also here illegally, and that I would have to part with them. How awful. And I had already paid money for them. Damn Alex. May heaven punish him. The man shook his small fists angrily. Alex? Angelica asked confusedly, who could only think about the fact that Tony had been arrested, and that somehow they hadn't touched her. For now, maybe they hadn't. Yes, Alex ran away, Amar said. He took money from me and many others. He escaped, they say, flew away in a helicopter. They should catch him, of course. But what if they can't? What if he just, I trusted him. He was my guest last year. Mr. Vat, Angelica suddenly grabbed the Hindu by the shoulders and looked into his eyes. I beg you, you must help me. Anything, my dear. He nodded like an antique dummy. What's the matter? I mean, I know it's chaos. But what do you need help with? The events of the next few days merged for Angelique into something like a ride on a dizzying merry-go-round from which you, alas, cannot get off. And later, looking back, she realized how grateful she was to Mr. Amar Vat. This man had serious connections, connecting which he managed to arrange everything so that Angelica was considered to be what she really was, only an innocent victim of circumstances and not even detaining. Only a few times questioned about everything that had happened. But with regard to Tony, Amar had to part his hands because this guy really did a lot and was now apparently in very big trouble. She only met him once, a few hours before the flight home. Amar had arranged for them to meet briefly. Hi, Angelica sighed. We don't have much time. I have so much to tell you. No need, Tony interrupted her harshly, sternly. I got you mixed up in all this. I'm sorry about that. It all happened. But I'm very grateful that you didn't leave me. You mean a lot to me. Angelique spoke hurriedly. And what I said about making a mistake. Don't say anything else, he interrupted her again. And there was so much pleading and despair in his voice that she fell silent. Just come home, okay? Live a normal life. Be happy. And you? I'll manage somehow. Tony grinned bitterly. It wouldn't be the first time. I'll let you know when I've got things back on track. She nodded. They didn't say goodbye to each other. She just walked away. Swallowing tears, which for some reason she could not cry, her eyes were dry, she got into the car and then into the plane. Once in her hometown, Angelica ordered a cab from the airport and went straight to the real estate agency to rent an apartment. She had money with her, and it should have been enough to get on her feet and start the process of divorce with dignity. Amar helped her, and it so happened that Angelica told him her whole story, and he said that even though she didn't want to be with him, he still wanted to help her. He had passionately, fiercely seized on the idea after realizing that he had lost the gold of Nero's era and the millions he had paid for it, as if this new gold made up for the lost one. It seemed to Angelica in general that he would never have let her go unless she agreed to accept this large sum of money, and also to vow that if there were any problems she would call him. Upon her return, Angelica also retrieved her belongings from Tony's apartment. The situation was resolved relatively easily because Tony had rented it from an old acquaintance of his, whom they had known since high school. This acquaintance he was able to call shortly before Angelica went home, and so when she returned, she easily picked up her things. And then she bought a new phone, a new SIM card, and began to call acquaintances, colleagues and friends already. Such a noise, panic raised, because Angelica did not go to work, did not answer the phone. Fortunately, she talked to everyone before they would have decided that she really happened to her something bad. This, by the way, was aided by the fact that Sam was running around calling everywhere, looking for his runaway wife. Angelica realized that she could not reveal the truth about her dangerous adventures abroad to anyone. So she answered simply that yes, her husband had cheated, and it was vital for her to temporarily get away from everyone and everything to think it over. The boss at work, who previously seemed to Angelica very strict and callous man, he suddenly showed understanding and only asked to finally return to work. Well, and also be sure to warn in the future if there were urgent family circumstances. Only Angelica decided that she would write a letter of resignation. She realized that she could no longer be an accountant. She did not yet know how it would be, but she realized that she had to, that she needed to do something that had to do with her real and very first profession. Days of compulsory 2-week workout flew by unnoticed. Angelica managed to refuse to talk to her husband in every possible way and to besiege those of her relatives and friends who, even being aware of the affair, insisted that it was, say, once and one should be able to forgive, one should save the family. But then the meeting with Sam finally took place. It happened at the birthday party of a mutual acquaintance, where they were invited. Angelica decided that tolerate society long will not become, and just give the gift, flowers bouquet, eat a piece of cake out of politeness and leave. Angelica, we need to talk. Sam caught her in the kitchen, where she'd gone out at the request of the lady of the house to fetch more clean plates. Angelica froze, holding the stack of plates in front of her, as if it were a shield against her ex's advancing appeal to her marital conscience. Okay, stop. She interrupted Sam. Come on, repeat, because I think I didn't hear. You demand that I go back, stop embarrassing myself, so you can do what? Decide who you want to live with. So you're saying that? Angelica swallowed Aubrey's unflattering definition. You're keeping this one as a backup in case I don't come back. Life is complicated, Sam said. I happen to have 2 women I love. I have to choose. But I can't lose both. You know, Angelica stepped forward. A stack of plates clinked threateningly. I was being molested by a crime boss and an Indian Raja eager to make me his mistress. The first one could wipe me out. The second was ready to shower me with diamonds and pearls. And you know, I've realized a lot of things, she grinned. And the main thing is that I'm never coming back to you. Let me through. She was right up to him. Don't embarrass yourself. Grab some more forks and get to the guests. Sam was left standing there with his mouth hanging open. His Angelica had never acted like this before. and fought back as if she was a complete stranger, strong and beautiful. Sam felt destroyed, crushed. The very next day he accepted the divorce and also proposed to Aubrey. She was cozy, affectionate, not clever, and most importantly looked at him with admiration, ready to do everything for their marital happiness. Sam decided to forget Angelica, who either went crazy or something else happened to her, and only it was not his Angelica cozy. Having counted her finances, Angelica decided to take a little break and take a good look at the world around her as to where she could work now. She would like to do so many things. And then suddenly a big change came into her life. At first, she wrote it off as fatigue from the stress she had experienced. Then she decided to go to the doctor. The doctor scheduled a visit to other specialists, and finally, "You're pregnant," the doctor told Angelique. "You're about 8 weeks along. Where have you been before? No offense, but at your age, it's advisable not to ignore such events." Angelique was shocked. How could she not have thought that such a thing was certainly possible after that night with Tony? It had been so natural. Himself had said then either. Or was she just a passing fancy for him, a lone wolf? Angelica made a final decision. She would not say anything to Tony about the pregnancy. Time flew by. Getting a job when she was about to go on maternity leave wasn't easy, but she found a place. Angelica became a tour guide at the local museum. The pay was modest, but the work was not difficult, and the main thing was close to what was her vocation. She called it Amar, not to ask for anything else, but just to say that she was doing well, and she was about to become a mom. Angelica did not expect anything special from the Hindu, but he, through his channels, having found out everything about her, sent her a basket of gorgeous roses, as well as a parcel with all sorts of things necessary for the baby. Angelica even cried a little, feeling sympathetic. Because of her family and friends, few supported her decision to become a single mom. Plus, the situation was complicated by the fact that she did not admit to anyone who is the father of the child. The baby was born at the natural time, without any complications. It was a boy, and barely looking at him, Angelica realized he is all in the father, and when she took him in her arms, her heart was flooded with so much love that she cried. Now Angelica's world really changed. Now there was only her and her baby. She took him to her mother, and she said that she was happy that she had a grandson. In general, Angelica had expected her mother to say a lot of unpleasant things about her personal life, but it did not happen. "It's your life, daughter," she said, "and to live it you must live it in your own way. Only, you more listen to what your heart tells you. It won't deceive you." And that's when Angelique made peace with her father. They hugged, and she said she was happy her Stan had a grandfather. Time flew by. When Stan was 4.5 years old, Angelica went on vacation. She planned to relax with her son somewhere in nature, in the fresh air. Throughout this time, Angelica sometimes called it Omar, and withstood his pressure when he offered material help, because he, in fact, and so has already done enough. This time, Omar started to offer again. "I didn't give your son anything for his birthday. You don't have to. But it's wrong. Angelica, you must not offend me by refusing this time." No, she was trying not to offend, and she was balancing not to fall for flowery speeches. "Did you say you were going on vacation?" Amar finally decided to change the subject. Angelica replied that she was. She'd has already chosen a trip to the sea, to Sri Lanka. In general, her acquaintances discouraged them to say that her son is too young to take him to the tropics, where the climate is unfamiliar and all sorts of infections occur. But Angelica thought that everything will be fine, and besides, she had long dreamed of seeing the cultural heritage of this island. She wanted to show her son all this wealth of history. And all the same, that Stan was still young, she thought that this trip would be good for him. But what was Angelica's surprise when, after she had barely got off the plane with her son, she suddenly received a message from Amar. He had texted, welcome, and then suddenly showed up in person. They hugged like old friends, and he said she would have to forgive him, but he just couldn't leave her alone. Amar talked and persuaded Angelica to change the modest hotel she had originally paid for to a luxurious luxury resort, and his arguments were very serious. It had its own amusement park for kids, a mini zoo. Angelica felt extremely uncomfortable. It was just hard to understand when and how, why Amar suddenly managed to become such a generous friend of hers. However, Angelica also thought about the fact that another's soul is dark. However, Amar did not bother, was not too intrusive, and generally said that he had business to attend to, so he was very busy. Angelica did not mind. She was happy to relax with her son, admiring nature. She took Stan on excursions, of course not too tiring for the baby. On one of the vacation days, Angelica was walking along the beach, holding her son's hand. The waves were lazily lapping on the shore, and suddenly she was called. She turned around and froze in front of her stood Tony. Angelica couldn't believe her eyes. He was. "Did you break out of prison?" she asked. "I thought you'd say you were happy to see me," he grinned. "No, I'm just free now." In just a few sentences, he explained how it came to be. It was all about a deal with the local authorities, who got a lot of valuable information from him about Alex and other members of the Mafia clan. And then, a year ago, Tony was released, and you didn't even call me. Angelica exclaimed indignantly. "A year on the loose, and you have a conscience." "I had to get back on my feet to sort myself out," he said and stepped closer. "Amar told me about you." "Oh, so it wasn't an accident?"